Have you ever heard someone say they love you while simultaneously taking away your power to choose? It's a special kind of violence, isn't it? Kind that comes wrapped in concern, delivered with a smile, justified with the phrase "it's for your own good." Those 6 words have probably destroyed more autonomy, suffocated more dreams, and broken more spirits than any outright cruelty ever could. Because at least with obvious abuse, you know what you're dealing with. But when control disguises itself as care? When manipulation calls itself love? When someone strips away your choices while insisting they're protecting you? That's when you start questioning your own sanity, wondering if maybe you're the problem, maybe you're ungrateful, maybe you should just be thankful someone cares enough to tell you how to live your life. Hey race, what nobody tells you about emotional manipulation in relationships, whether it's a partner, a parent, or any family member, it doesn't start with the big moments. It starts with small compromises, tiny concessions, little moments where you swallow your objections because it's easier than fighting, because you're tired, because you love them and surely they mean well. One day you're agreeing to skip dinner with friends because they prefer you stay home. The next, you're turning down a job opportunity because they think it's too much stress for you to handle. Before you know it, you're living a life that looks nothing like the one you imagined, and the person controlling it insists they're doing it out of love. The scariest part? You almost believe them. You almost convince yourself that this is what partnership looks like, what family means, what love requires. But what if I told you that the people who truly love you don't need to control you to keep you? What if the relationships worth having are the ones that celebrate your autonomy instead of fearing it? What if that voice in your head, the one that whispers this isn't right during those moments of forced compliance, is actually the sanest, truest part of you, desperately trying to be heard over the noise of their manipulation? This is the story of someone who heard that voice and finally, after years of silence, decided to listen. This is about the moment when "for your own good" became the last straw instead of another link in the chain. This is about what happens when the person being controlled stops asking for permission to live their own life and simply takes it back. You're about to discover how seemingly loving words can be weaponized, how family dinners can become battlegrounds, and how the quietest rebellion is sometimes the most powerful. You'll learn to recognize the patterns of control that hide behind concern, the guilt trips disguised as family values, and the manipulation that masquerades as wisdom. More importantly, you'll see how one person dismantled an entire system of control not through confrontation or explanation, but through strategic action and unshakable resolve. Because sometimes the most radical act of self-love is simply refusing to participate in your own imprisonment anymore. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't hurting the people who've controlled you, it's building a life so authentic, so free, so undeniably yours that their manipulation can't touch you anymore. Ready to find out how it's done? Let's begin. There's something about family dinners that feels sacred, you know. The clinking of silverware, the smell of roasted chicken filling the kitchen, maybe some laughter echoing from the living room while someone sets the table. It's one of those moments that's supposed to feel safe, like coming home after a long day and finally exhaling. For most people, it's a routine so familiar it becomes almost invisible, just another Thursday night where everyone gathers around the same wooden table they've sat at for years. But hey race, the thing about routines, they create patterns, and patterns create expectations. When you expect safety, you let your guard down. And when your guard is down, you don't see the manipulation coming until it's already wrapped around your throat like a silk scarf, beautiful, but suffocating. She sat there that evening, passing the mashed potatoes to her younger brother, listening to her mother talk about the neighbor's new car. Everything seemed normal, almost boringly so. Her father was quiet, as usual, cutting his steak with that methodical precision he'd always had. This was the family dinner she'd known her entire life, the one where toxic family dynamics hid behind polite conversation and forced smiles. There was no screaming, no obvious conflict, just the steady hum of a family going through the motions. She felt that fragile sense of belonging, that whisper in the back of her mind saying, "See? Everything's fine. You're overthinking things." Trust in her parents was still mostly intact, even though tiny cracks had been forming for months. She pushed those doubts aside, telling herself that controlling parents were something other people dealt with, not her family. The comfort of routine can be a dangerous thing, especially when it comes to family control stories that unfold so gradually you don't notice you're the protagonist until you're already trapped in the plot. That night, she wasn't looking for signs of emotional manipulation family members often use. She was just trying to enjoy her dinner, maybe share a story about work, feel like she was part of something bigger than herself. Her mother smiled at her across the table, that warm smile that had tucked her in at night as a child. Her father nodded along to the conversation, occasionally adding a comment about the weather or asking her brother about school. This was the image of normalcy, the kind of scene you'd see in a commercial for family values. But underneath that surface, something else was brewing, something she couldn't quite name yet. What makes these moments so powerful in dark family drama is precisely this false sense of security. You walk into the room expecting love, expecting support, expecting to be seen as an autonomous human being. Instead, you're walking into a carefully constructed stage where every line has been rehearsed, every response predetermined. She didn't know it yet, but this family dinner manipulation was about to shift from invisible to undeniable. The parents using guilt as their primary weapon had perfected their craft over decades. They knew exactly when to strike, exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to make control feel like care. And she, sitting there with her plate still warm and her heart still hopeful, was about to learn that toxic parents' narrative doesn't always announce itself with cruelty. Sometimes it whispers through a smile and calls itself love. The shift happened so subtly she almost missed it. One moment they were talking about weekend plans, and the next, her mother's voice dropped into that particular tone, the one that sounded gentle but carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken expectations. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about something important," her mother began, setting down her fork with theatrical precision. Her father straightened in his chair, and suddenly the room felt smaller, the air thicker. This wasn't a conversation, it was an ambush dressed in Sunday clothes. The transition was seamless, practiced, like actors hitting their marks on a stage they'd performed on countless times before. She felt her stomach tighten, that instinctive response your body gives when it knows danger is near but your mind hasn't caught up yet. The family revenge story that would unfold from this moment started here, in this deceptively calm exchange. "After everything we've done for you," her mother continued, and there it was, the key manipulative phrase that unlocked decades of conditioning. Those 7 words carried more power than any threat ever could. They weren't just words, they were an invoice, a reminder that love in this family came with strings attached, payments due, interest compounding. Her father nodded slowly, adding his voice to the chorus, "We've sacrificed so much to give you opportunities we never had. The least you could do is consider what we're asking." The emotional manipulation family dynamics were now fully on display, no longer hiding behind pleasant dinner conversation. They spoke about their sacrifices, the late nights working, the vacations they didn't take, the dreams they postponed. Each statement was designed to build a mountain of debt she could never hope to repay. What they were asking seemed reasonable on the surface, the way poison can taste sweet if mixed with enough honey. They wanted her to reconsider her job offer in another city, to stay closer to home, to think about family first. "We're not saying you can't have your own life," her father said, his voice carrying that edge of hurt disappointment had perfected. "We're just saying that family should come first." Is that so wrong? This is how controlling parents operate. They frame control as concern, manipulation as love, their needs as your moral obligation. The decision, she realized with growing horror, had already been made in their minds. They weren't asking for her opinion, they were informing her of the verdict and expecting compliance. The trial had happened without her knowledge, and she had already been found guilty of the crime of wanting her own life. Guilt was being weaponized before her eyes, wrapped in the language of devotion and sacrifice. Her mother's eyes glistened with practiced tears as she talked about how empty the house would feel, how worried they'd be with her so far away, how family is supposed to stick together through thick and thin. "We're not getting any younger," her father added, playing his ace card. "Who knows how much time we have left? Would you really choose a job over us?" The toxic family dynamics had never been more transparent, yet somehow they still expected her to pretend this was normal, loving, acceptable. Parents using guilt as their primary tool of control know exactly how to make you feel like the villain for wanting basic autonomy. Every objection she might raise had already been anticipated and reframed as selfishness, every dream she held redefined as betrayal. The manipulation was so complete, so all-encompassing, that for a moment she almost believed them, almost accepted that wanting her own life made her a bad daughter. Her mother leaned forward, adopting that patient, almost pitying expression she used when explaining things to children who just didn't understand the world yet. "Honey, I know you think this job is important, but let's be realistic here," she said, her voice dripping with condescension masked as wisdom. "You're young. You don't see the big picture yet. In 5 years you'll look back and realize we were right all along." Each word was carefully chosen to diminish, to reduce her thoughts and feelings to the naive fantasies of someone who simply hadn't lived enough to know better. This wasn't a dialogue, it was a lecture, a sermon delivered from the pulpit of parental authority. The condescending explanations came wrapped in smiles and soft tones, making it nearly impossible to call out without seeming dramatic or disrespectful. This is the insidious nature of emotional manipulation. Family members deploy. It operates in shadows, in implications, in the space between words. Her father joined in, using logic as a weapon the way some people use their fists. "Let's think this through rationally," he said, as if rationality meant agreeing with whatever he decided. He listed reasons why her decision was flawed, why her priorities were misguided, why her feelings about the opportunity didn't match reality. "You're being emotional," he concluded, and there it was, the ultimate dismissal. Emotional invalidation disguised as logic is perhaps the cruelest form of gaslighting, because it makes you doubt not just your decisions, but your very capacity to understand your own life. He made her ambitions sound foolish, her excitement sound immature, her independence sound like rebellion against common sense. The toxic parent's narrative was unfolding exactly as it had 100 times before, just with different details, different dreams being crushed under the weight of their supposed wisdom. Across the table, her younger brother kept his eyes on his plate, pushing peas around with his fork like they were the most fascinating thing in the world. Her aunt, visiting for the week, suddenly became very interested in her water glass. Other family members watch in silence during these moments, complicit through their refusal to intervene, their unwillingness to risk becoming the next target. This silent audience gave her parents permission to continue, their lack of objection serving as tacit approval of the humiliation unfolding. She caught her brother's eye for just a second, saw the flash of sympathy quickly replaced by relief that it wasn't him in the hot seat this time. Family control stories always have these witnesses, these silent participants who could speak up but choose safety over solidarity. Their silence spoke volumes. Sid said that survival in this family meant keeping your head down and being grateful you weren't the one being dissected. The expectation of obedience hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Her parents didn't raise their voices, didn't need to. The power dynamics in toxic family dynamics don't require screaming, they operate through the unspoken understanding that resistance is futile, that arguing will only make things worse, that good daughters don't question their parents' wisdom. "We're not asking you to give up everything," her mother said, reaching across to pat her hand with what was supposed to look like affection. "We're just asking you to be reasonable. To put family first, the way we raised you to." The touch felt like a brand, marking her as property, as an extension of their will rather than a separate person with her own dreams. Obedience was expected without resistance, and any pushback would be reframed as ingratitude, selfishness, a fundamental character flaw that proved they were right to control her in the first place. She sat there, feeling the quiet humiliation settle into her bones, understanding with perfect clarity that in this family, love and control were considered the same thing. Her mother leaned forward, adopting that patient, almost pitying expression, the one reserved for explaining simple concepts to someone who just doesn't quite understand how the world works. "Honey, I think you're being a bit naive about this whole situation," she said, her voice dripping with condescension masked as maternal wisdom. "You don't really understand what you'd be giving up, what you'd be walking away from. We've lived longer, we've seen more, and trust me when I say that these career opportunities come and go, but family is forever." The condescending explanations continued, each one delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her father joined in, laying out their logic with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned their right to control another person's life. This silent revenge family story was being written in real time, though they had no idea they were crafting their own downfall with every dismissive word. What struck her most wasn't just what they were saying, it was how they were saying it. Every concern she'd tried to raise about her own life, her own dreams, her own future was being systematically dismantled and reframed as evidence of her immaturity. "You're too emotional about this," her mother said when she tried to explain why this job mattered. "You're not thinking clearly," her father added when she mentioned her 5-year plan. The emotional invalidation disguised as logic was masterful in its cruelty. They weren't screaming or throwing things, they were simply explaining, with maddening calm, why everything she wanted was wrong and everything they wanted was right. The toxic parent's narrative was playing out exactly as it had throughout her childhood, her feelings dismissed, her thoughts minimized, her autonomy treated as a phase she'd eventually outgrow. Her younger brother sat frozen across the table, eyes fixed on his plate like it contained the secrets of the universe. Her grandmother, visiting for the week, suddenly became very interested in her napkin, folding and refolding it with intense concentration. Other family members watch in silence, they always do. It's the unspoken rule of families built on control: don't interfere, don't defend, don't acknowledge that anything wrong is happening. Their silence was its own form of violence, a collective agreement to let the manipulation continue unchallenged. She looked around the table, hoping for an ally, someone who might say, "Hey, maybe she has a point," or let her make her own decision. But there was nothing, just averted eyes and the sound of forks scraping against plates. The breaking family control would have to be her job alone. No one was coming to save her. The expectation of obedience hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Her parents didn't need to explicitly demand her compliance. Decades of conditioning had taught her that resistance was futile, that arguing only made things worse, that the path of least resistance was simply to nod and agree and let them win. "So it's settled then," her father said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "You'll call them tomorrow and decline the offer. There are plenty of good jobs here in town." Her mother reached across the table and patted her hand, that gesture meant to signal that everything was fine now, that the uncomfortable moment had passed, that they could all go back to pretending they were a normal, loving family. The manipulative parent's story had reached its expected conclusion, or so they thought. What they couldn't see through their arrogance and certainty, was that something had shifted in her eyes. The quiet humiliation she felt in that moment wasn't breaking her, it was crystallizing something sharp and unbreakable inside her chest. She took a slow breath, set down her fork, and did something that surprised everyone at the table, including herself. She smiled. Not a forced smile, not a bitter one, but something calm and almost serene. "You're right," she said softly, her voice steady and measured. "You're absolutely right." Her mother blinked, momentarily thrown by the easy victory. Her father relaxed back into his chair, satisfaction spreading across his face like butter on warm bread. They'd expected tears, maybe an argument, perhaps days of silent treatment followed by grudging acceptance. But this immediate agreement. The protagonist doesn't argue, doesn't raise her voice, doesn't give them the resistance they'd been prepared to wear down. Instead, she simply nodded, took a sip of her water, and asked her brother to pass the salt. The emotional power reversal had begun, though they were too blind to see it. What her parents didn't understand, what controlling parents never understand, is that sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes agreement is not acceptance. She watched them across the table, really watched them for the first time in years, and saw them clearly. The way her mother's smile widened with triumph, the way her father's shoulders loosened with relief, the way they exchanged that quick glance of mutual congratulation. They thought they'd won. They thought this family dinner manipulation had gone exactly according to plan. But she wasn't capitulating, she was calculating. Every condescending word they'd spoken, every dismissive gesture, every moment of emotional invalidation was being filed away, catalogued, understood for exactly what it was. The dark family drama was entering a new act, and for the first time, she was directing the script. She doesn't defend herself because defense implies there's something to defend against, and Shed realized something crucial in that moment of forced compliance. Their opinion of her choices didn't matter. Their approval wasn't required. Their control was an illusion that only worked if she continued to believe in it. So she let them think they'd won. She answered their questions about when Shed make the call, agreed with their suggestions about local job opportunities, even thanked them for helping her see reason. Her mother actually teared up with relief, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "I'm so glad you understand, sweetheart. We only want what's best for you." The irony was almost too perfect. They had no idea that in trying to control her, they'd finally set her free. The family control stories that end with genuine liberation always have this moment, this quiet turning point where the victim becomes the strategist. Her brother caught her eye for just a second, and she saw the question there, the confusion, maybe even a flicker of concern. But she simply smiled at him and asked about his upcoming soccer game, redirecting the conversation with practiced ease. She observes everything now with new eyes, the way her mother steers every topic back to family obligation, the way her father frames every decision as a reflection of respect or disrespect toward them, the way they've built an entire system of control on the foundation of guilt and fear. What is she planning? If her brother was wondering that, good. If anyone at that table sensed something had shifted, even better. But she wasn't about to announce her intentions, wasn't going to give them advance warning, wasn't going to make the mistake of believing that explanation or confrontation would change anything. Shed spent years trying to make them understand, trying to earn their respect, trying to be seen as an adult capable of making her own choices. That chapter was over. This was the beginning of something else entirely, something they would never see coming. That night, lying in her childhood bedroom with its faded posters and memories trapped in time, she stared at the ceiling and let the pieces fall into place. This wasn't the first time. God, how had she not seen it before? The pattern stretched back as far as she could remember. Every boyfriend they'd disapproved of until she stopped dating altogether, every friend they'd found unsuitable until her social circle shrank to people they approved of, every dream they'd redirected until Shed almost forgotten Shed had dreams of her own. The family pattern becomes clear when you finally stop making excuses for it, stop convincing yourself that this time will be different, stop believing that if you just explain it better they'll finally understand. They understood perfectly. That was the problem. This wasn't about understanding, it was about control, pure and simple. The toxic family dynamics Shed been swimming in her entire life suddenly became visible, like someone had turned on the lights in a dark room. Every family gathering replayed in her mind with new clarity, the graduations where her achievements were immediately compared to cousins and found wanting, the holidays where her choices were dissected and criticized under the guise of just trying to help, the casual comments about her weight, her clothes, her job, her life, all delivered with a smile and the phrase "we're family, we can be honest with each other." The manipulation is fully exposed now that she knew what to look for. It was in every "after everything we've done for you" guilt trip, every decision they'd made for her own good without consulting her, every time they'd framed their control as love and her resistance as ingratitude. Parents using guilt had turned it into an art form, and Shed been their canvas for 28 years. But canvas can be painted over, can't it? Canvas can be stretched in new directions, repurposed, reclaimed. She pulled out her laptop and started making a list, not of grievances, but of facts. The job offer with its start date in 6 weeks. Her lease that was month to month. Her savings account that Shed been building quietly for 2 years, never mentioning it at family dinners because Shed learned early that any resource she disclosed became a resource they felt entitled to influence. The apartment listings Shed been browsing in her new city, the ones with big windows and no memories attached. The friend from college who'd moved there last year and kept saying she should visit. Each item on her list was a step, a piece of the puzzle, a move on the chessboard. She realizes this isn't an isolated incident, it's the culmination of a lifetime of small surrenders, tiny deaths of self, moments where Shed chosen their approval over her own authenticity. Well, that ended tonight. Tonight, at a family dinner that was supposed to end with her defeated and compliant, something else had been born instead. The final internal decision is made not with drama but with certainty, the kind of certainty that comes when you finally stopped arguing with reality. They would never change. They would never see her as an autonomous adult. They would never stop trying to control her life, not because they were evil, but because they genuinely believed they had the right to do so. They believed their age and their role as parents gave them permanent authority over her choices, her body, her future. And maybe in their world, in their generation, in their understanding of family, that was normal. But it wasn't her normal anymore. She wouldn't convince them they were wrong. People convinced against their will are of the same opinion still, as the saying goes. She wouldn't wait for their permission or their blessing. The breaking family control required something they would never give her, so she would simply take it. Strategic silence became her weapon of choice, not because she was afraid of confrontation, but because she finally understood that some battles aren't won through argument or won through action. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning while her parents were at their weekly golf game, she loaded the last box into her car. No dramatic goodbye scene, no tearful confrontation in the driveway, no speech about independence and boundaries. Just systematic, methodical action, the kind that can't be undone with guilt trips or manipulation. She'd already signed the lease on her new apartment, already confirmed her start date with the company, already forwarded her mail to her new address. The concrete, irreversible action she'd taken wasn't born from anger but from clarity. She left a simple note on the kitchen table: "I've accepted the job. I've moved. I'll call you when I'm settled. Please respect my decision." No justifications, no apologies, no opening for negotiation. The silent power reversal was complete before they even knew it had begun. This is how you break free from manipulative parents storing out with their permission, but despite their resistance. The beauty of her strategy was its simplicity. She hadn't announced her plans at another family dinner, hadn't given them weeks to wear her down with their concerns and objections. She'd simply smiled, nodded, gone to work, come home, and quietly arranged her entire life while they congratulated themselves on keeping her under control. No confrontation or announcement meant no opportunity for them to deploy their usual weapons. They couldn't guilt her about decisions already made. They couldn't talk her out of apartments already rented. They couldn't manipulate her into staying when she was already gone. Strategy replaces emotion when you finally understand that some people will never respect your boundaries until you enforce them without seeking their approval. She'd spent years trying to make them understand, trying to earn the right to her own life. Now she understood: you don't ask permission to be an adult. You just become one. As she drove away from the house where she'd grown up, where she'd learned to make herself small to keep the peace, where she'd been slowly suffocating under the weight of their expectations, she felt something unexpected. Not anger, not even relief, just a quiet kind of power, the kind that comes from finally trusting yourself more than you fear disappointing others. Control quietly changes hands when the person being controlled stops participating in the dynamic. Her parents had built an entire system around her compliance, her guilt, her desperate need for their approval. But what happens when the foundation crumbles? What happens when the person you've controlled finally realizes that your love with conditions isn't the only love available in the world? The family revenge story she was living wasn't about hurting them, it was about saving herself. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to play the game anymore. She thought about calling them from the road, explaining herself one more time, trying to make them see why this was necessary. But she'd learned something crucial in those 3 weeks of careful planning and strategic silence. Emotional manipulation family members use only works when you care more about their feelings than your own well-being. She cared about them, she probably always would, but she cared about herself more now. That was the shift, the fundamental change that made everything else possible. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother. "Did you really leave?" She smiled and typed back yes. "And I'm okay. Better than okay." Because that was the truth. They would never understand that leaving wasn't running away, it was running toward a life where her choices were her own, where no was a complete sentence, where after everything we've done for you held no power, because she'd finally learned that debt forgiven is debt paid. The phone calls started within hours of them finding her note. First her mother, voice shaking with what she probably thought sounded like devastation but came across as fury barely contained. "How could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you." There it was again, that phrase they wielded like a sword, expecting it to cut through her resolve the way it always had. Her father's voicemail was more controlled, more calculated. "We need to talk about this. You're making a huge mistake. Come home and let's discuss this like adults." The irony of that last sentence almost made her laugh. They'd never treated her like an adult, but now that she was acting like one, suddenly they wanted a mature conversation. They repeat the same manipulative phrases because it's all they know, the only language they speak fluently. But repetition doesn't equal power when the listener has finally learned to translate manipulation into what it really is: fear of losing control. By the third day, the messages had escalated. Her mother left a tearful voicemail about her health, about stress, about how this was affecting her blood pressure. "I can't eat, I can't sleep, I'm worried sick about you out there all alone." Guilt, authority, and victimhood are used in a desperate cocktail, each ingredient carefully measured to achieve maximum impact. Her father tried a different approach: anger masked as concern. "You're being selfish and irresponsible. What if something happens to you? What if you need us? You're burning bridges you can't rebuild." They'd never considered that maybe those bridges needed to burn, that some connections are so toxic the only healthy option is to sever them completely. The toxic parents' narrative they'd constructed required her to be the problem, the ungrateful daughter, the one who abandoned her family. They couldn't see or refused to see that she hadn't abandoned them. She'd escaped them. Her grandmother called next, recruited as reinforcement, her voice gentle but insistent. "Your parents are just worried, dear. Maybe you could come home for the weekend, talk this through. Family is everything, you know." Even her brother texted, clearly coached. "Mom's really upset. Dad's been in a bad mood all week. Can't you just call them back?" The desperation was spreading, infecting everyone they could reach, trying to build a coalition of concern that would drag her back into the fold. But hey race, what they didn't understand about the manipulation no longer works once you see the strings, you can't unsee them. Once you recognize the pattern, the guilt, the tears, the anger, the recruitment of flying monkeys, it loses its power. Shed spent 28 years believing that their emotional reactions were her responsibility, that she was the cause of their pain, that she owed them peace at the expense of her own. Not anymore. Their feelings about her choices were theirs to manage, not hers to fix. The final voicemail from her father was perhaps the most revealing. His voice had lost its authority, replaced by something that sounded almost like panic. "We just want to know you're safe. We just want to be part of your life. Is that so wrong?" And there it was. Fear changes sides when the dynamic shifts. They were afraid now, afraid of losing relevance in her life, afraid of what it meant that she'd actually left, afraid that maybe all those years of control had built walls instead of bonds. The female empowerment family dynamic they'd never anticipated was playing out: a daughter who loved herself enough to leave, who valued her own peace more than their approval, who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is establish distance. She listened to the voicemail twice, not out of guilt but out of curiosity, amazed at how differently it sounded now. Where she once would have heard love and concern, she now heard exactly what it was: a last-ditch effort to reassert control through a different emotional channel. She saved the voicemail, not to torture herself with it, but as a reminder of why she'd left in the first place. 6 months into her new life, she sat in her apartment with the big windows and the sunlight streaming in, and realized something profound: family is not permission to control. The people who share your blood, who raised you, who claim to love you, none of that gives them the right to dictate your choices, manipulate your emotions, or treat your autonomy as negotiable. This wasn't a lesson she'd learned from a book or a therapist's office, though both had helped. This was bone-deep knowledge earned through the pain of breaking free, through the guilt she'd had to wade through the nights she'd questioned whether she was being selfish or finally being sane. The controlling parents who had shaped her entire existence had taught her this lesson unintentionally: that sometimes the people who say they love you the most are the ones who understand love the least. Real love doesn't demand obedience. Real love doesn't weaponize sacrifice. Real love doesn't make you feel like you're drowning every time you try to breathe. Shed started therapy shortly after the move, finally able to afford it with her new salary and finally willing to admit she needed it. Her therapist had asked her a question that changed everything: what would love look like if it didn't hurt? Shed sat there, stunned, realizing she'd never considered that possibility. In her family, love always came with conditions, always required sacrifice, always felt like a debt she could never fully repay. But love doesn't require obedience. That was control masquerading as care. Love celebrates your growth, even when it means growing away. Love trusts you to make your own mistakes and your own triumphs. Love doesn't say after everything we've done for you, because love doesn't keep a ledger. The toxic family dynamics Shed escaped had taught her to confuse control with concern, manipulation with devotion. Unlearning that conditioning was like learning to walk again, stumbling at first, but getting stronger with every step. Her parents had eventually stopped calling daily, though the weekly guilt-laden messages continued for months. Shed established boundaries, another concept that was foreign to her before the move. Shed called them once a week, on her schedule, and when the conversation turned manipulative, Shed calmly ended it. "I love you, but am not discussing this. I'll talk to you next week." Click. The first time she hung up on her mother mid-guilt trip, her hands had shaken for an hour. The 10th time, it felt almost routine. Guilt only works when it's accepted, Shed learned. It's like a package delivered to your door. You can choose not to sign for it. You can let it sit there, unclaimed, until the sender realizes you're not participating in that exchange anymore. The emotional manipulation family members deploy is only effective when you internalize it, when you agree that their interpretation of events is more valid than your own experience. Shed stopped agreeing. That simple act of disagreement, maintained consistently over time, had changed everything. There was a moment, about 8 months after Shed left, when her mother called and actually asked about her life without immediately segueing into complaints or criticisms. It was brief, maybe 2 minutes, but it was their glimpse of what relationship might be possible if they could ever truly let go. She didn't know if they'd ever fully change, if they'd ever understand why Shed had to leave the way she did. But Shed learned something crucial: cycles break in silence, not in explanation. She hadn't convinced them she was right. Shed simply stopped needing their validation. Shed built a life on her own terms, a job she loved, friends who respected her boundaries, hobbies Shed never had time for, mornings where she woke up without that tight knot of anxiety in her chest. The silent revenge family stories always talk about had never been about hurting them, it had been about healing herself. And maybe that's what revenge really is when you're dealing with people who've controlled you, living well, living freely, living authentically despite their best efforts to keep you small. Shed broken the pattern, and in doing so, Shed given herself the greatest gift anyone can receive: permission to be fully, unapologetically herself. So here's the question you need to ask yourself, and I mean really ask yourself, not the version of you that's been conditioned to please others, but the raw, honest part of you that knows the truth. Are you living your life, or are you performing in someone else's script? When you make decisions, are they truly yours, or are they calculated to avoid guilt trips, manipulative tears, and the dreaded phrase, "after everything I've done for you"? How many dreams have you postponed? How many opportunities have you declined? How many versions of yourself have you buried because someone who claimed to love you convinced you that their control was actually care? And here's the harder question, the one that might actually keep you up tonight: how much longer are you willing to live this way? Think about the last time someone made a decision for you for your own good. How did it feel? Not how they told you it should feel, not how you convinced yourself it felt afterward, but in that moment, when your autonomy was being stripped away with a smile, what did your gut tell you? That instinct you've learned to silence, that voice you've trained yourself to ignore, that feeling you've dismissed as selfishness or ingratitude, what if it's actually the healthiest, sanest part of you trying to save your life? What if every time you override your own judgment to keep peace with someone else, you're not being loving or mature or selfless, you're just slowly disappearing? And what will be left of you if you keep vanishing piece by piece to satisfy people who will never be satisfied because satisfaction was never their goal, control was? The woman in this story didn't break free because she stopped loving her family. She broke free because she finally started loving herself more. That's not selfish, at survival. That's not betrayal, that's growth. That's not running away, that's running toward the life she deserved all along. And if her story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in those family dinners and forced compromises and guilt-laden phone calls, then maybe it's time to ask yourself what your breaking point is. Or better yet, why you need a breaking point at all. Why wait until you're shattered to start building boundaries? Why wait until you've lost yourself completely to start the journey back? The people who truly love you will respect your autonomy. The ones who don't weren't loving you, they were using you. Hey race, what I want you to do right now, today, before the courage fades and the old patterns reassert themselves, identify one area of your life where someone else's control has been masquerading as concern. Just one. Maybe it's a parent who monitors your finances to help you, a partner who checks your phone because we shouldn't have secrets, a family member who makes decisions about your life because they know best. Write it down. Look at it. Ask yourself honestly, is this love, or is this control? And this is the crucial part, ask yourself what you're going to do about it. Not what you should do, not what would make everyone happy, not what would avoid conflict. What are you going to do to reclaim that piece of yourself? Because cycles break in silence and action, not in explanation and hope. You don't need their permission. You don't need their understanding. You just need your own commitment to yourself. If this story moved you, challenged you, or gave you that spark of recognition that says I needed to hear this, then do me a favor, don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, because we're going to keep having these conversations, keep exploring these dynamics, keep shining light on the manipulation that hides behind love. You're not alone in this. There are thousands of people waking up to the same realization that family and love should expand your life, not shrink it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, not to attack their relationships, but to give them permission to question, to choose, to be free. And remember, the people worth keeping in your life are the ones who celebrate your growth, not the ones who punish you for it. Your life is yours. Not theirs. Yours. Now go live it like you mean it.